The target grammar for this lesson is relative clauses with whose. There are various types of relative clauses. Here we're focusing on relative clauses with whose. Let's look at the meaning. Look at this example. David Hockney is a painter whose art has inspired people for decades. This sentence contains a relative clause using whose. But what does it mean? We use whose to talk about something belonging to or connected with a person, animal, place, or plant. It is a possessive word like his, her, its, and their. So in the example above, you could separate it into two sentences, like so. David Hockney is a painter, full stop. His art has inspired people for decades. So in a sense, we're replacing the possessive pronoun his with whose. That's basically all we're doing. We're taking two sentences and pushing them together to make one. And we're replacing the possessive pronoun, for example, his or her or its, with the word whose. Now let's look at a few examples so it's much clearer for you. Here's the first one. The wild rose, whose colors range from white to dark red, is very different to the human-bred rose. In this sentence, we're replacing the possessive pronoun its with whose. Because the wild rose is a plant, it's a thing, we would normally use the possessive pronoun its. So we're replacing that with whose. If we delete everything within the commas, we still have a good sentence. The sentence will read, the wild rose is very different to the human-bred rose. So these commas act as a separation. This kind of clause is called a non-defining relative clause. We will learn more about these in the Things to Note lecture. Here's another example. We found an abandoned dog whose leg was broken. We took it in, and now it's as healthy as can be. In this example, someone found an abandoned dog, and its leg was broken. So instead of saying its leg was broken, we can just add it to the previous sentence and say, we found a dog whose leg was broken. Whose replaces the possessive pronoun its. Let's look at one more example. The volunteers were sent to a small town whose population was recovering from a severe water shortage. In this sentence, whose replaces the possessive pronoun its. Its is referring to the town. We could separate this example into two different sentences. We could say, the volunteers were sent to a small town, full stop. Its population was recovering from a severe water shortage. But instead of having two sentences, we've merged them into one and used whose. Think of relative clauses using whose like that. Just imagine that you have two sentences, two separate sentences, and the second one begins with a possessive pronoun. For example, its, his, her, or their. Then you can delete the pronoun, replace it with whose, and merge the two sentences to become one. In this way, your sentences sound much more fluent and much more advanced. Instead of saying one simple sentence and another simple sentence, you can merge them into one slightly longer sentence, which sounds much more fluent. Now move on to the structure for whose, and then the things to note lecture, which is very important. There are a few important things you have to note for relative clauses using whose.